Good morning and welcome to another session of Mind at Home. My name is Mind Mover Pecier and I will perform our activity for today. So let's just wait for a few more moments for the audience to come in and join us. So again, good morning and welcome to yet another session of Mind at Home. My name is Mind Mover Pecier. I'm one of the science communicators from the Mind Museum. And for this session of Mind at Home, we are going to learn about moon phases using food. And that's why we call this activity Edible Moon Phases. So again, for those who are just arriving and who are here with us, welcome, welcome. So there so far, I'm seeing 6, 7 already. So let's maybe wait for 3 more. And once there's 10 of us here, let's start with our activity, which again is about edible moon phases, how we can use food to learn about the phases of the moon. Alright, so there's 10 of us here. I guess we can start. So once again, good morning. My name is Mind Mover Pecier. I'm one of the science communicators from the Mind Museum. And this is another session of Mind at Home, where we do science experiments to help you who are at home cope with our current situation. So, of course, we are right now in the middle of a global pandemic. And because of this pandemic, many of us are understandably stressed and anxious. And it's very reasonable. So to help us deal with the situation, we have come up with Mind at Home because as we know from science, and according to the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, one of the most effective ways to deal with the anxiety and the stresses of the current situation is to do things at home that are fun and that you can learn from. And we here at the Mind Museum firmly believe that fun and learning can go hand in hand, and that is why we prepare these activities for Mind at Home. So just a reminder for those of you who are at home, of course, stay at home as much as possible and only leave if absolutely necessary to get supplies, for example. And always wash your hands. Don't forget to wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. So 20 seconds is about how long 2 happy birthdays is sung, right? So especially before this experiment, because this experiment involves you handling food. So I've just washed my hands earlier several times already with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. So let's now go on with our experiment. And again, the title of our experiment for those who've just arrived is Edible Moon Phases. So we're gonna handle food. So for the first half of our experiment, the only ingredient we're gonna need, the only material is a chocolate cookie with a cream filling. Right? So you want a cream filling so that the color of the cream is as close as possible to the color of the moon when you see it in the sky, especially when it's high in the sky. So to do this first half of the experiment, all you need to do is twist the cookie open. Let's twist it open. There you go. So that one side is almost entirely like lacking of cream, just a residue of cream right there. And the cream is all on one side. Okay? And then you have one phase of the moon already. That's already one phase of the moon. That's a full moon. Of course, you can use a spoon to shape it into all the other phases of the moon. So we have, for example, you can draw letter C, what we would draw usually when we think of moon. We carve it into a C, right? A crescent shape. Or for example, I want it almost full. So I'll carve out some part here with my spoon, right? Oops. Until I get that, and then I carve it out. Catch some of the crumbs falling on the plate. And then eat it. Alright, share it with your friends and family so that you don't eat too much of the cream, which has a lot of sugar in it. So, but it's yummy. But share it so that you don't eat too much of the thing with sugar, right? And then you have an almost full moon, which is one of the phases of the moon, actually, a gibbous moon. So now let's look at all the phases of the moon. I have prepared them all here. I'll show you real quickly all the phases of the moon right now. There they are. The one in the middle is the one I just made. And you can see all the phases of the moon right there. So let me just hold them up one by one and let's talk about what their names are. So when we want to do phases of the moon, we always start with this one. Right, the new moon. So in Filipino, our word for new moon and a new month are the same set of words, bagong buwan. And that's because actually the months in our calendar are based on the cycles of the phases of the moon. Bagong buwan, right? Which both means new month and new moon. Because again, the month is based on the cycles of the moon. And the month, actually, in many calendars, starts with the new moon. That's why it's called new moon, bagong buwan. And then we go to our next phase of the moon, right? After that, we have a crescent shape. So I've used my spoon to carve out the rest of the cream and leave just a little bit of the crescent shape. There you go. And the crescent is to the right side of the cookie. And this is what we call a crescent. But it's a crescent that's about to get bigger because it started from new moon, right? So this is what we call a waxing crescent. Waxing is just another word for getting bigger or getting larger, right? That's why we say someone wax poetic. They become bigger because of poetry. So waxing poetic, waxing crescent, lumalaki ang moon. All right, so that's a few days, in fact, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days after new moon. And then after new moon, after waxing crescent, we get to a half moon. Kalahati na lang, right? Kalahati na, right? Palaki pala siya, no? Kalahati na. And that half moon, right, if it's on the right side, it's called your first quarter. Because if you look at the cycles of the moon again, let me hold this up again, right? It marks the first quarter of your cycle. So you can divide your cycle into 4. From new moon to here, it marks the first quarter. That's why we call it the first quarter moon, right? Which is our first half moon of the month. And then we go to the next one, which is our almost full moon. Almost, but not quite. We call it a gibbous moon. And this gibbous is becoming bigger. On its way to becoming larger, on its way to becoming full. That's why we call it what's the word again for becoming bigger? That's right, waxing. So we call it a waxing gibbous moon. Palaki siya ng palaki. Alright, waxing again is just another word for getting bigger. Right? Okay, there you go. Alright. So now we go to full moon, right? Which is when you don't eat any of the cream. Just leave it there and eat it for later. Right? So full moon. And then after full moon, you have another gibbous moon. But this time, your gibbous moon gets smaller. Paliit naman siya ng paliit. And our word for getting smaller is waning. Right? Waning is another word for getting smaller or decreasing. So this is what we call a waning gibbous moon. And then we have another half moon. So it gets smaller and smaller until you reach another half moon. Kalahati na siya ulit, but the half is on the left side. Nasa kaliwang bahagi naman ng buwan, right? And we call it the last quarter moon because it's in the last part of your cycle, right? The last quarter of your cycle. And then it'll get smaller. Liliit pa siya lalo. But the lit side is still on the left side, right? And it's getting smaller. So what's your word again for smaller or getting smaller? It's waning, right? That's why we call this a waning crescent moon. And then after that, we get back to a new moon. So the cycle repeats over again. So again, let's just review the cycles. Right? It goes from new moon, and then your waxing phases, waxing crescent, first quarter, waxing gibbous, full moon, and then you have your waning phases, the waning gibbous, last quarter, and waning crescent, and back to new moon again. So that cycle from new moon to new moon, right, lasts around 29 to 30 days. And that is the basis for our month. Now, 29 to 30 days, or what we call a synodic or synodic month. So let me just wait for a few moments for a question. And then let's go to another part of our experiment. So questions. First, last quarter moon actually means we see half of the moon. We see half of the moon. Yeah, in a way, we're looking, so the first and last quarter, so the half moons, we are seeing half of the moon that's lit, right? So we are seeing half, the part of the moon that we're looking at, half of it is lit, naiilawan ng araw, right? And half of it is in the dark, like this one. Nasa dilim, right? Nasa anino siya. Okay? But actually, all the time, half of the moon is lit. Kalahati ng buwan naaarawan. So, it's gonna be difficult with these because these are just circles. So, I'm gonna need a spherical thing, a round thing to represent that. So this is the spherical thing I have. Ito yung bilog na object ko dito. I don't have a ball at home, so I have just an orange. Yeah, orange. At any time, kalahati niyan, half of it is lit by the sun. But when it's half moon, like first quarter or last quarter, the way we're looking at the moon, half of it is in the light, naiilawan, and half of it is in the dark. Kalahati siya sa kanya, nasa dilim. And then on the other side, there's a side of the moon we don't see. Half of it is also in the dark, and half of it is also in the light, right? So in a way, we are seeing, there's a way that we can say, yeah, we are seeing half of the moon all the time. But when we're looking at it during half moon, the part that we are seeing, half of it is lit by the sun. Kalahati sa kanya, na iilawan ng araw. Okay, so we have another question. Does the cycle always start with the bright part of the moon on the right side as viewed from Earth? So these cycles, it depends on us humans, kung saan natin gustong simulan i-count, right? It depends on us where do we want to start counting the cycles. So many cultures have just decided to start at new moon, right? Or in other cultures and in other systems, they start at the thinnest crescent right after new moon, right? For example, in the Islamic system, in the Muslim calendar, Islamic calendar, they start their months, their Islamic months, the religious months, when they see that thin crescent, right after new moon. That means, oh, tapos na yung previous month. So it depends. It's we humans who decided. But in most systems, yes, it's that crescent right after new moon, and the crescent right after new moon just happens because of the geometry of the sun, earth, and moon that it's the right side. Because of course, there's really no right side in space. So when you look at the moon with the north going up, it's on the right side of the moon. The eastern side of the moon is lit by the sun. Okay, so that's when we think the cycle starts. We consider. But you can start the cycle in new moon. It's up to you. Full moon. And when you start at full moon, the cycle after that is waning gibbous, right? So it depends on humans to decide when to start the cycle, but the order in the cycle, yung pagkakasunod-sunod nila, is set by the way the moon moves around the earth, which is counterclockwise. Next question, why does the moon look yellow sometimes? So it has something to do with our atmosphere. So for example, when the sun is setting, what is the color of the sun? And again, reminder to those of you, don't look directly at the sun, right? Even during sunset, try to look at it just very quickly and not for a long periods of time. What does the sun look like? It looks a little bit orange, right? And that has something to do with the fact that when objects are up in the sky, the atmosphere between us and the object is thin, right? So not a lot of interference, wala masyadong harang. But when objects are near the horizon, like a setting sun or a setting moon, or a just rising moon, yung packet pa lang na buwan, or palubog na ng buwan, right? When you look at them, the atmosphere between us and the object is thicker, mas makapal. There's a lot of interference, mas maraming harang, right? And because of that, the atmosphere bends some of the light away, the blue especially. That's why the sky is blue, because blue bends and scatters mostly easily. So the blue and the violets and the greens are scattered, leaving just the yellows and the oranges and the reds. And that's why that's the color of the sun during sunset, and that's why that's the color of the moon when it's about to set or when it's just rising. Pagpangat pa lang siya. So I'll get back to some of your questions in a bit, but for now, let me go to the last part of my experiment. So we saw the face of the moon, for those who just arrived. We saw that we can make moon phases using cookies, right, and cream. And that's what we used to start talking about the phases of the moon. But why does the moon have phases? So to do this experiment, we need a darker place. We're gonna go to a darker place over there later. We're gonna need something round. So in my case, it's an orange, right? And we're gonna need a source of light, right? Or a flashlight. Oopsie. Hello. All right. So we're gonna need a source of light or a flashlight. So I'm just gonna turn on my flashlight here. There you go. All right. And let's do this experiment in a bit. But by the way, here, when you're doing this experiment, the flashlight, of course, represents the source of light, which is the sun, yung pinanggagalingan ng ilaw. the orange or the round object that you have, like a ball, represents the moon. And you, yung mukha mo, represents the earth. And in the real outer space, it's really who's moving around what? Is the sun moving? So with respect to the solar system, you're right, the sun is stationary at the center. No, only wobbles a little bit. Gumagalaw siya ng konti. But it's more or less stationary at the center, nasa gitna. Meanwhile, the earth moves around the sun. No? Yung mundo umiikot sa araw. And then the moon moves around the earth. Yung buwan umiikot sa mundo. Right? But since motion is relative, and for the sake of convenience, later when we do this experiment, I'm just gonna move the flashlight around our orange. That simulates the way the angle between the moon and the sun change across the month. Okay? So let's go to that darker area right now. So the camera is gonna get shaky, a little bit shaky in a while. There you go. So, and there's a little bit of echo in this part of our house. All right. And I'm gonna put the orange right in front of me here. Let me switch the camera up. There you go. And then I'm gonna light my orange from different angles. So I'm gonna start with the sun or the flashlight right behind the moon. So sometimes you can have an eclipse like that. That's an eclipse. But most of the time it's like this. So eclipses are kind of rare, right? When the sun is really blocked by the moon. Most of the time it's like this and we don't see the moon because the sun is so bright. That's our new moon. And then as the moon goes around the earth, you will see phases, crescent, first quarter, half moon, and then you have your gibbous, and then you have your waning gibbous. It's gibbous again, but getting smaller. And then you have your half moon, last quarter half moon. Let me switch up my hand. Then you have your waning crescent, and then new moon again. And the cycle begins anew, right? So again, just a reminder here, I'm moving. There we go. Let me turn on the light and switch off the camera. Hey, I'm moving the flashlight, but a reminder that in outer space, in the real solar system, it's really the moon that moves around the earth. No? Yung buwan talaga yung gumagalaw at umiikot sa daigdig, right? So let me just get my moon. Here. Got my moon back. All right. So let me answer a few more questions. Is this also the reason why blood moon takes place? Oh, that's an excellent question. Blood moon. So earlier I answered the question why the moon appears yellow sometimes. And the answer behind that is the atmosphere of the earth. Sometimes the moon is in a position in the sky where there's a lot of the atmosphere between us and the moon. So makapal yung atmosphere sa pagitan natin at yung buwan. No? Sa pagitan natin tumitingin between us who are looking at the moon and the moon. And because of that thicker atmosphere, the atmosphere scatters the light and gives us yellowish moon. Now the question is, why do we have a blood moon when the moon appears reddish, right? Rusty red. Namumula-mula yung moon ng konti. Hindi siya mamula-mula as in rosy red. It's a dull kind of red. Grayish kind of red, right? Not a vibrant kind of red. And that happens, actually, because of a very different thing. That happens because the moon happens to be in the shadow of the earth. Nasa anino ng daigdig yung buwan, right? And the shadow of the earth is mostly dark, black, like most shadows. But there is a special kind of light that, so for example, this is the earth. Yan naman yung earth na. Kanina moon to. And now imagine this is the earth. It's the only round thing I have here at home. And this is light coming from the sun, right? Ilaw galing sa araw. Now remember, the earth has an atmosphere, right? May nakapaligid sa earth na gas. This atmosphere is again really good at scattering away the blue, the violet, the green in the light coming from the sun. Remember, light coming from the sun is white light, no? Roy Gibbous. And white light is Roy Gibbous. Meron siyang red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And yung latter part nun, yung Gibbous, is easiest to scatter. And it's mostly the reds and the oranges that go through. So the red, siya yung nakakalagpas. It's the one that goes through. It goes through and even enters the shadow of the moon a little bit. And the shadow of the earth. And that's why the shadow of the earth is a little bit reddish, right? Has a little bit of a red hint to it. And that little bit of red, when it falls on the moon, is what makes the moon appear red. And so you can think of a blood moon, which is a total lunar eclipse, kung kailan natatabunan yung buwan ng anino ng daigdig, when the moon is covered by the shadow of the earth. A total lunar eclipse. You can think of a total lunar eclipse as the effect that happens when all of the sunrises and sunsets on earth are reflected on the moon. Right? Because again, remember, all those reddish parts, those are sunsets and sunrises. Right? Okay, now let's go to our next set of questions. But thank you. I hope I answered your question about the blood moon. Next, does the size of the moon we see affect how strong the tides are? So, as a matter of fact, yes. So, in two ways it affects. So first, it affects the strength of the tides, how high the high tide is, and how low the low tide is. It affects it in two ways. First, it affects it depending on how close or far the moon is. So the moon goes around the earth, not in a circle, but in an ellipse. So sometimes the moon is closer to the earth, and sometimes the moon is farther from the earth. Minsan mas malapit, minsan mas malayo. Right? So when the moon is closer, the tides are higher. High tide is higher. No? Kasi mas malapit yung moon, and it's the moon that pulls the earth's ocean to create the tides. Now, it also depends on the phases of the moon. Again, we have created here using our edible moon phases, using the cookie and cream. Yan, gamit yung mga cookies natin. Alright, so when it's a new moon, or when it's a full moon, ang ibig sabihin nito, what this means is that, let me turn on my flashlight again. Again, remember that the flashlight represents the sun, and the orange is the moon again. Moon siya, and I'm the earth. During full moon, it's like this, right? The sun is directly facing the moon, and we can see the part of the moon that is lit by the sun. And yun yung full moon. When it's new moon, it's like this. We're looking at the dark side of the moon, right? Or, well, the dark side of the moon at the time. There's no such thing as the dark side of the moon. No? Paiba-iba yung position ng dark side of the moon. But this time, the side of the moon we're facing is the dark side of the moon, and this is the sun. That's new moon, right? So during full moon and new moon, the earth, sun, and moon are aligned. Nakalinya sila, right? And when that happens, the high tides are higher and the low tides are lower. Okay? And that's what we call a spring tide. Not necessarily because it happens in spring. It happens every month. But I don't know actually why it's called spring tide. That's a good thing to research on. Because I guess it's related to springtime. Okay, so that's the spring tide. Full moon and new moon as the moon goes around the earth. Now sometimes you have a half moon, like a first quarter moon, we saw earlier, or a last quarter moon. And that happens when the angle between the sun, earth, and moon is 90 degrees. 90 degrees. Right? Okay. So when that happens, the gravitational pull of the sun and the moon don't add up. Hindi sila nagtutulungan. Rather, they contradict each other in a way. And that makes the high tide not so high and the low tide not so low. Alright, next question is, what is a blue moon? So a blue moon is just a term we use for an extra moon. Right? So sometimes the word blue moon means the second full moon in a calendar month. Yung pangalawang kabilugan ng buwan sa isang buwan sa kalendaryo, right? The second full moon in the calendar month. The original use is really the extra full moon in a quarter, in a season. So in places where they have 4 seasons, spring, summer, autumn, and winter, right? So there's approximately 12 divided by 4, 3 full moons per season, right? 3 full moons. But sometimes there are seasons where there's 4 full moons. That's extra full moon is what they call a blue moon. It does not appear blue. Hindi siya blue yung itsura niya. And it's not very rare, right? Happens quite often actually. Almost every other year. So that's what a blue moon is. The extra full moon in a season or in a quarter. But nowadays, most people use the term blue moon to mean the extra blue moon, the extra full moon in a calendar month. Alright, so I'm not seeing any new questions, and because of that, I'm gonna talk about one last experiment that you can do with the tumbler, and I'm just gonna get it. It's also related to the faces of the moon. So my orange here looks almost the same from all angles, so it's not going to be useful for this experiment. So I'm going to use my tumbler, because one side of my tumbler has my friend right there, right? And the other side does not. So one side looks very different from the other. Now here's the amazing thing about the way the moon moves around the Earth. So say this is the moon and I'm the Earth. My face is the Earth. The way the moon moves around the Earth is such that one face of the moon always faces the Earth. So the face of the moon with this doggy, right, always faces the Earth. Parating nakaharap sa daigdig. So there's a side of the moon that we always see, a near side of the moon, and there's a far side of the moon we never see from Earth. A far side. So near side and far side of the moon, right? And the only people who have seen the far side of the moon are astronauts who've flown around the moon, or people who look at pictures on the internet by pictures taken by spacecraft. So the moon wobbles a little bit, ganyan ng konti yung moon, but more or less shows the same face. No? And it's that face where we see what they call the man on the moon or the rabbit, depende sa mga tao. Kung whatever shape you see there on the near side of the moon, those craters, the big craters, what are called the mares, diba? Sea of tranquility, sea of clouds, ganyan. They're called seas, but they're not really seas because, of course, there's no liquid water on the moon. Those dark areas, that's always the same face of the moon facing us. The far side of the moon we've never seen from Earth. It has craters too, but the craters are smaller and more numerous. Mas maliit at mas madami compared to the craters on the near side of the moon. So that now links us to the question, is there a far side of the moon? Is there a dark side of the moon? Yes, all the time. But it's not permanent. So during full moon, the dark side of the moon is the opposite side. It's the far side. This is totally dark. But during new moon, pag bagong buwan, right, it is the near side of the moon that's the dark side of the moon. And during their half moons, the dark side of the moon is this side, or maybe this side, depending on whether it's first quarter or last quarter. Okay, so I'm not seeing any new questions? Let me see. All right, no new questions. Thank you very much for those questions, and thank you very much for watching our yummy experiment. So I hope that this encourages you to make edible moon faces at home. I'll show you one last time what the edible moon faces are. So you can see I'm already sweating and I'm excited to be in front of my electric fan. There you go. So that is the edible faces of the moon using cookies and cream, right? And for the other experiment, why there are faces of the moon, you just get a round object, kahit anong bilog sa bahay. What I happen to have here is an orange. Kakainin ko to in a little bit. And then a source of light, like a flashlight. So here, yung flashlight ko lang dito na maganda would be from a cell phone. So let me turn on. And then, yeah, cell phone. And then you just shine a light on the moon from different angles. Right? And then you will see kung bakit may faces. Right, so thank you very much for watching this session of Mind at Home. The next session of Mind at Home will be on Monday, May 11. It's a day after Mother's Day, but we'll have a Mother's Day special then, where we will learn about capillary action and how capillary action can be used to make flowers bloom in water. So I bet you're already excited to see how that is done, kung paano gawin yun. So I hope you join us then. Thank you very much. Don't forget to like and follow the Mind Museum on social media so that you're alerted on when our next Mind at Home session will be. Goodbye! Oh, don't forget also to wash your hands all the time, especially before this experiment, right? Where you're gonna handle water.